Hello students, today we are going to learn the first chapter of Hornbill, the Portrait of a Lady. Before I teach you the chapter or before I tell you the story of the chapter, let me tell you something about the writer of this chapter. Khashwan Singh is the writer of this chapter. He was an Indian author, right? And he was born in the year 1915 and he died in 2014. He was a journalist, a lawyer, a politician, a diplomat, and of course a writer. His experience of the war 1947 inspired him to write his well-known novel Train to Pakistan. Okay, and he was one of the finest journalists. Okay, so he was a great writer. Now I am going to tell you about the chapter The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khashwan Singh. Children, this is an autobiographical extract. Okay, what do you mean by an autobiographical extract? This chapter is about the life of Khashwan Singh, okay, his own life, right? Now, what has he written in this chapter? Khashwan Singh in this chapter has penned down his relationship with his grandmother. Okay, how he was with his grandmother when he was a child and when he was a grown-up person. So he has mentioned that how his grandmother looked, okay, when he was young, how he has witnessed his grandmother working so hard. So this chapter will although tell us about the grandmother of Khashwan Singh, but we will get to understand about all the ladies, about all the grandmothers, about all the mothers who so dedicatedly devote themselves for family. Okay, never complaining, never demanding, and they work for their families so dedicatedly. So here in this chapter, we will be able to make a portrait of a lady. Clear? Now, when the chapter starts, children, Khashwan Singh has mentioned the character sketch of his grandmother. How his grandmother looked. Okay, she was fat, she was bent, okay, she stooped. Stoop means jhukna. And when she stooped, she used to keep one of her hand on her waist so that she can balance her walk, okay, and with another she used to tell her rosary beads. What is rosary bead, children? Mala. Okay, she used to always enchant her prayers and she used to carry a rosary beads with her, okay, and she was always working and she had wrinkles on her face from everywhere to everywhere. Clear? But for Khashwan Singh, she was the most beautiful lady. She looked so serene in her white sari, okay, in her silver locks, silver hair, clear. For him, she was the most beautiful lady. But Khashwan Singh, it was difficult for Khashwan Singh, or it was hard for Khashwan Singh to believe that his grandmother was once very pretty, once got married, she must have been a kid once, okay, she must have played games when she was a kid, clear. So it was very difficult for Khashwan Singh to believe all this. Why? Because Khashwan Singh has witnessed his grandmother in the same manner as he saw his grandmother for 20 years. Okay, he said that his grandmother could not be older than what she was. Clear? He could not imagine his grandmother young, getting married, having young children. Okay, so for him, his grandmother was old and must have been old throughout his life, throughout her life. As far as grandfather is concerned, Khashwan Singh saw the picture of his grandfather above the mantelpiece. What is mantelpiece, children? The wooden shelf above the fireplace. Okay, so Khashwan Singh just saw the picture of his grandfather, and grandfather had beard till his chest, clear, and he looked older than 100 years. Okay, and it was difficult for Khashwan Singh even to believe that his grandfather would have been young once. Clear? So here Khashwan Singh believed that his grandmother and grandfather would have been same as he has seen his grandparents. Clear? So old, wrinkled, but for him grandmother was the most beautiful lady. Clear? Now, after writing the character sketch of grandmother, Khashwan Singh has mentioned his relationship with his grandmother in 3 phases. Okay, now the first phase was when Kushman Singh was young and his parents went to city to earn, okay, for business purpose. Then Kushman Singh was left with his grandmother in village. Clear? Now his grandmother did all his work. She used to wake him up, get him ready for school, okay, make him bathe, clear, make him wear his dress, and she used to make his lunch, she used to wash his slate, okay, she used to prepare his bag in which she used to keep an earthen ink pot, clear, and slate and the pencil, a small pencil also, and she used to prepare the bag of Kushman Singh. She used to prepare the lunch box of Kushman Singh. Clear? She used to make him ready for school, bathing him, getting him ready, dressed up, everything. Okay. And she used to continuously work. Okay. And she used to hobble. Hobble means unbalanced walk. She used to keep one of her hand on her waist, having the rosary beads in another hand, and she used to walk around the house continuously working and enchanting her prayers. One reason why grandmother used to enchant her prayers was that she wanted Kushman Singh to learn all those prayers. So while making him ready for school, she used to continuously enchant her prayers so that Kushman Singh may listen to all those prayers and may learn them. Okay. Now, when Kushman Singh's grandmother used to prepare tiffin for Kushman Singh, she used to keep extra stale chapatis with her, right? And they both used to go to school. Kushman Singh's grandmother took Kushman Singh to his school. And where was the school, children? Temple. Okay, the temple was the school of Kushman Singh. In the temple courtyard, children used to sit, learn alphabet, numbers, and even prayers. And while Kushman Singh used to learn all these, grandmother used to sit inside the temple and she used to read the scriptures. Clear? And when she used to return from the temple, she used to feed all the dogs on the way back to her home, right? The stale chapatis which she used to keep with her, clear? The extra stale chapatis, she used to feed all the dogs on her way to house. Clear? So this was what she used to do when she was in village, and they had a very close bond as all the work of Kushwan Singh was being done by his grandmother. Clear? Now, Kushwan Singh's parents called Kushwan Singh and his grandmother to city. So they were sent for by their parents. Kushwan Singh and Kushwan Singh's grandmother were sent for by their parents. Parents got settled in the city and now they called both of them. When they reached city, okay, so their relationship was not as it was in village. It got snapped. Why? Because, of course, it was not as it was in village because they just shared a common room. Initially, Kushwan Singh's grandmother was doing little bit of work of Kushwan Singh, like waking him up, dressing him for school, right? So, but later on, this also was not being done by grandmother. Kushwan Singh was going in an English medium school, clear, and he was going by a motor bus. He was reading English books. So, Kushwan Singh's grandmother could not even help him in his studies. Could not go to drop him to school, right? The only common link left was they shared a common room. Okay, initially a little bit of work was being done by grandmother, but later on that also was not being done by grandmother. Now what happened? The Kushwan Singh, when he used to return home, Kushwan Singh used to tell his grandmother what all they are being taught, science, English, right? Kushwan Singh's grandmother was disappointed. Why? Because Kushwan Singh was not being taught prayers. Okay, he was not being taught religious scriptures. So she was a bit disappointed. And one day what happened? Kushwan Singh when returned from school and disclosed to his grandmother that he was being taught music, Kushwan Singh's grandmother was very upset. though she did not say anything, but she was really upset because music in those days were associated with only the harlots and the beggars, not the reputed families. But she did not say anything. Now the last phase came where the common link also broke. What was the common link? That they were sharing the same room, right? When Khashwan Singh pursued his higher studies, then Khashwan Singh was given a separate room. Clear? He was given a separate room when he went to university, and the common link between grandmother and Khashwan Singh got snapped. Clear, children? Now, after some time, Kushman Singh went to abroad for his further studies. Clear? Now her grandmother accepted her loneliness without saying anything. Okay? She accepted her seclusion, her isolation without complaining, and she started utilizing her time in three things. One, in afternoon she used to relax and she used to feed the sparrows in the veranda. That half an hour used to be the best time for grandmother. The sparrows used to sit on her shoulders, on her head, and she used to love feeding them, right? She used to make small breadcrumbs and she used to feed them. And there was a very close bond between sparrows and grandmother, right? So she used to feed the sparrows. Second, she used to spin the wheel, charkha, right? So she used to continuously spin the wheel to pass her time. Third, she used to enchant her prayers. So she used to keep herself busy in these three pieces of work. Right, am I? Now, Kushman Singh, when was going to abroad, children, right? Then what happened is, Kushman Singh thought that he won't be able to meet his grandmother again. And his grandmother would get emotional. But nothing of that sort happened. Clear? What happened when grandmother went to station to drop her grandson, then she displayed no emotions. She was just constant. She was not showing any emotions, right? And she just kissed Kushman Singh on his forehead. And Kushman Singh felt so good receiving that imprint, that moist imprint on his forehead, and he thought that this would be the last, touch that he is feeling of his grandmother. Okay, but when he returned after 5 years, grandmother was the way she was when Kushman Singh left her for abroad. Clear? And when Kushman Singh came home, for the first time, grandmother did not pray. Clear? She collected all the ladies of neighborhood and she banged the drums and she sang the songs of warriors homecoming. Clear? She sang songs with the ladies of neighborhood and she was banging the drum. Clear? And she felt very ill. She felt quite ill that evening, that night. Okay? Doctors were called. Doctors told the family members that she should not take any stress. Okay? Then grandmother just laid down on bed. Though the doctors said that it is just a fever and this fever will leave grandmother, but grandmother somewhere knew that my end has approached. Clear? So what happened when grandmother knew that my end has approached? She was constantly enchanting her prayers. Her rosary beads, mala, was in her hands and she was continuously enchanting her prayers. Right? And finally, grandmother died, and when she died, only then her lips stopped praying. Her hands left the rosary beads. Clear? Then the time of a funeral came. Clear? She was wrapped in a shroud, right? Red shroud, and she was brought out. And when her dead body was brought in the veranda, there were several sparrows. But that day, it was so unusual to see that the sparrows did not chirp. Okay, previously they used to chirp a lot. Okay, they used to chirp so loud. But today, the sparrows were sitting silently without chirping. Clear? All the sparrows were sitting, and the mother of Kushman Singh thought that the sparrows are hungry. So she brought some breadcrumbs and fed them. but sparrows did not touch the breadcrumbs. And when the body of grandmother was taken away for funeral, for cremation, then the sparrows, without touching the breadcrumbs, flew away quietly. And next day, those breadcrumbs were thrown into the dustbin. Here the chapter ends. One important thing that I would like to discuss here is the character sketch of the grandmother of Khashwan Singh. Of course, the physical appearance I have already told you, right? The second thing is, children, that she was, very hardworking. She kept on working all the time. She was a religious lady. Okay, she just kept on enchanting her prayers. She was an animal lover because in village she was feeding the dogs and in city she is feeding the sparrows. Clear? So she was and she never complained. She accepted everything, though she got disappointed, but then she accepted everything. Now a quick revision of the chapter through this mind map that I have made on the board. The title of the chapter is The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khashwan Singh. I have already told you, I have already given a brief introduction of Khashwan Singh in the beginning of the lesson, right? The protagonist, grandmother, she loved animals, right? I told you, in village she fed dogs and in city she fed sparrows. She always prayed, right? She always kept on enchanting her prayers and telling her rosary beads. Then she was fat and slightly bent. Okay, she stooped and wrinkles on her face, right? So this is the physical appearance as well as the character sketch of grandmother. Now I told you the friendship of narrator, and the narrator here is Khashwan Singh, the writer of the chapter. The friendship of narrator and grandmother was in three phases. One, they were close friends in village. I told you why were they close friends? Because all the work of Khashwan Singh was being done by grandmother, from waking him up to taking him to school and doing everything, teaching him, right, everything. Then second one was they went to city, and the only common link was, children, the common room. Other than that, Khashwan Singh was going by motor bus. He was studying in an English medium school, so the relationship was not same as it was in village. The third is the bond of friendship snapped when the third link also broke, and the third link was the common room, right? Khashwan Singh was given a separate room. Now Khashwan Singh's grandmother accepted her seclusion quietly, accepted her loneliness quietly, and what all things she was spending her time in: spinning wheel, enchanting her prayers and feeding the sparrows. Now Khashwan Singh went to abroad for his higher studies, right? And when he went, Khashwan Singh's grandmother did not show emotions, and she just kissed on his forehead. Kissed his forehead, did not show emotions. And when narrator returned after 5 years, okay, narrator returned after 5 years, then she did not pray, and she collected the ladies of neighborhood and she banged the drums and she sang songs, and then she fell ill and her end approached, right? Her end came and the mourning sparrows. So this is what is there in the chapter, children. I hope you understood the chapter. Thank you.